Mhm. Starting my speech in three, two, one. I want to firstly point out that neither of the harms observed by Goff are exclusive. Sure, farmlands are damaging environment for growing cattle, but understand that opening ranch and field to grow rice and barley also takes away the same area of forests. Even palm oil doesn't, right? Carbon emission will happen in Gulf side anyway because of forest fire to open lands. So primarily at worst, harm is symmetric. But if companies would also lobby government regulation in our side, they will probably lobby a restriction even more because it's more sudden, it's more radical in their side. This is even more turmoil, for example, resulting into clashes with industrial workers between like companies and government to begin with. We don't think it's justified in any manner. What is the stance in opening opposition? We don't limit or ban any consumption and production of meat. We stay to status quo, and we are going to explain why it's A, justified, and B, why the alternatives of banning meat are even worse. Two contributions we're going to get from this speech. One, I'm going to tell you why the individual's human right to consume meat is going to be a principled way directly engaging against God. Secondly, I'm going to tell you why the alternative that God apparently asserted to be good might not be actually that good. Firstly, let's talk about why this is human rights and individuals' rights to consume meat, right? 2 points of explanation. One, I just need to point out this idea of immorality from God. This might be a bit harsh, but the perspective that we should be debating upon should not be as environmentalists or animal rights activists. As an average reasonable person who apparently will probably sit in the government, for example, who makes these kinds of policies, would you ban on top production and consumption of meat? You probably are not because of three reasons. A, the common perception of humans is that animals are not humans to begin with. They have different degrees of conscience. They have different degrees of social awareness and a necessary desire to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Morality is then determined by humans to consider the lives of other humans as more important compared to other living creatures. But even to that extent, even if you want to, take the bullet straight on and argue that we eliminate the life of conscient creatures, God does the exact same thing because you also grow plants to eat them, and plants can be considered as living creatures since they're also conscient in a way. This looks like they form symbiosis, for example, with animals. They give shelter and protection. So even on that point, the principle harm is symmetric anyway. B, if it's true that animals are humans, I think it more justifies humans' position as an apex predator anyway of the food chain, given that insofar as humans have no alternative, as I'm going to tell you in the second contribution, we are justified to produce and consume meat. But see, the trade-off is that you don't only sacrifice meat consumption, but also meat producers, which is a lot, understanding the context of like of overconsumption, right? Because you leave these individuals to having to shift to other sectors of work, for example, without prior experience. Important way of morality this is, especially from the perspective of state, for example, who cater to the vulnerable actor, especially a lot of industrial workers who have no alternative but to work in this particular industry. So yeah, as a state, you're most likely not going to do this. Second layer then, right? Let's talk about individuals' rights to consumption. Why is it justified? Three reasons as well. A, this is justified because I'm going to tell you that there's no alternative, right? Insofar as we have to weigh the rights of humans versus animals, it's important to consider which rights you want to fulfill. Humans who are suffering because of no consumption and malnutrition, or animals who would most likely experience a painless death anyway in thought. On this, we will recognize that painless death is the quickest and the safest method of reproduction, since companies might also face scrutiny for violent slaughter, but also, like instant or painless murder or painless, slaughter of these animals are the quickest and the most instant way to produce meat. B, you cannot punish humans for doing the same thing that every other living creature would do. Sure, this kills animal, but so do every single living creature in existence when they try to preserve the continuation of their species. Therefore, humans are just practically acting on their natural conscience to use the environment or like animals around them to continue their livelihood. It's justified to that extent. But lastly, even if humans just eat meat because they want to, it's fine. Why? Because they have no information that the slaughter is violent and inhuman to begin with. Humans cannot be deemed as complicit because they don't intentionally eat meat to kill animal, but they do that to continue their living for the better, right? So this non-existence of information is super, super important to consider because then you cannot necessarily deem humans as immoral anymore because humans have no prior information that what they're doing are immoral to begin with. Therefore, what have we proven? We proved it is principally justified for humans to consume meat. Secondly, then, right? What is your alternative? This is going to tackle all the assertive assumptions from opening government. 4 points of important explanation. A, vegan diets will be much more expensive in Gulf. We refuse the premise that currently is expensive because of less demand, right? I think basic economic logic tells you that by less demand, it should mean cheaper price. The same way it's in status quo, lettuce is cheaper than chicken. Within that, by more demand in Gulf, it gets even more expensive. Since one, increase of market price, for example, that is currently stabilizing, but in Gulf, there's going to be limited supply and massive ton of demand for vegetable. This leads to even increase of prices. But two, there's a monopoly of type of food that is produced and can be consumed. This is the oligopoly market, for example, conspiring to create a higher price for their own profit because this is the only kind of food that are produced that can be consumed and legally consumed by individuals. In conclusion, increase of price unjustified. B, if it is true that people have that much desire to eat meat, I think it's probably not easy to suddenly shift to vegan diets, right? It's important to know that it's not a clean slate debate where people are already vegan in the world. There's an entire population of billions of people who rely on meat as their diet. This means that people are struggling to change their lifelong diet to exclusively be based on plant diets, right? This doesn't sound like much, but understand that the period of transition where people get to habituate themselves with a new diet is bad. It's like a dietary shock, for example, where you have to rebrand your eating habit in a very radical manner in a very short time. This is the majority of people who can no longer enjoy their usual comfort food in meat, for example. In conclusion, sudden change lead to dietary shock and nutritional problems. C, if it is true that people are really into meat to the extent of overconsumption, it also influences how companies will behave in their economic approach. Even drugs, which were the benefit of the entirety of human existence, still exist in underground activities because there are demand for it. This means the opposite cannot just assume, God cannot just assume that people would suddenly stop eating or at least demanding meat. This is the worst overconsumption because underground activities would exist in God and there's no possible way of government monitoring, right? But even if there is, companies will still be able to rationally weigh whether or not the profit that they can get with a really high price because it's legal from meat will outweigh the possible sanction or punishment from government, which OG I think is mechanized anyway. We don't really understand why you disincentivize government companies to begin with. No likelihood analysis at that point. But lastly, even if not, this might lead to vegan meat production, like what they make in Burger King, for example, vegan Whopper made into meat, right? It's just super bad because one, there's a lot of chemicals in that thing, probably bad for health, and two, the industry creating it has a very long process, which also contributes to lower quality of environment because of pollution. So it's not only symmetric, it's even worse in golf. What is the conclusion, right? Three things. One, there's an urgent problem of malnutrition and low food consumption because of this terrible policy. Two, this negates Gov idea of alternative existing because we told you that alternatives are worse. And three, at best, the proposal is not well timed. If any changes are to happen, it's going to be organic. This radical policy is not going to change anything. It leads to more malnutrition and political turmoil. We're so proud to propose. Oppose.